The sun was rising slowly over the city skyline. Tall buildings reflected the early morning light, and the streets below buzzed with activity. In one of the biggest automotive companies in the country, something was seriously wrong. Inside a large glass building filled with modern machines and busy engineers, there was tension in the air. Richard Calloway, the CEO of the company, stood in the middle of the testing room, his face tight with frustration. A few days ago, his team had been working on a revolutionary project, an advanced hydrogen engine that could change the future of transport. It was supposed to be clean, powerful, and efficient. But something had gone wrong. The prototype engine, which had taken months to build and millions of dollars to design, had failed in front of investors. It didn't just stop working. It broke down in a way that none of the company's best engineers could understand. Richard paced back and forth. He wasn't just upset. He was embarrassed. This project was his dream, and now people were beginning to lose confidence in him. His team had been working non-stop to find the problem, but every time they thought they had fixed it, the engine failed again. "Sir, we've gone through every line of the code, every part of the engine design," one of the lead engineers said, tired and nervous. "But nothing seems out of place. Theoretically, it should be working." Richard sighed deeply. "Then why isn't it?" Nobody had an answer. Later that afternoon, Richard and a few of his engineers traveled to a small town on the edge of the city. One of their suppliers had a service garage there, and Richard wanted to check if the faulty parts had come from that facility. It was supposed to be a quick visit, just routine inspection. The garage was simple, almost old-fashioned. The walls were covered in posters of classic cars, and the floor was dusty. In one corner, a woman was working under the hood of a small pickup truck, her sleeves rolled up and her hands covered in grease. Her name was Natsia Qureshi, and she looked like just another local mechanic, quiet, focused, and busy fixing something. No one else noticed. Richard didn't pay much attention to her at first. He was more interested in inspecting the boxes of parts stacked in the back. But as they were preparing to leave, the faulty hydrogen engine prototype, packed in a special metal case, caught Natsia's eye. "That's not a regular engine," she said softly, wiping her hands and walking over. Richard turned, surprised that she had spoken. "No, it's not. It's something far more advanced than anything you've ever worked on." There was no harshness in his voice, just amusement, like someone speaking to a curious child. Natsia didn't seem offended. She looked at the engine case again. "What's wrong with it?" One of the engineers beside Richard chuckled. "Even we don't know." "Oh?" Natsia raised an eyebrow. "So it's broken?" "It's more than broken," Richard said. "It's unsolvable. 10 of my top engineers have been working day and night, and no one has a clue." There was silence for a moment. Then, almost jokingly, Richard said, "You think you can fix it?" He didn't expect her to say yes. It was just a sarcastic comment, something to break the awkward silence. But to his surprise, Natsia nodded slowly. "Maybe," she said, looking at the engine with genuine interest. "I'd like to try." Richard laughed, more out of disbelief than disrespect. "You? No offense, but this isn't a motorbike carburetor. This engine is high-end tech. We're talking about hydrogen fuel systems, quantum control circuits, AI-assisted diagnostics. It's not something you fix with a wrench and duct tape." "I understand," Natsia replied calmly, "but I can still try." Her confidence made. The engineers exchanged looks. One of them whispered, "She's serious." Richard shook his head. "Fine, knock yourself out. It's already a dead engine. Can't get worse." He turned to his team. "Leave it here. Let's see what our small-town mechanic can do." They left the engine in her garage and returned to the city, joking about it on the way. Richard didn't expect to hear anything back. To him, it was just a funny story to share later. How a small-town woman claimed she could fix what top scientists couldn't. But back in the garage, Natsia was already at work. As the dust settled and the sun began to set, She rolled up her sleeves, further tied her hair back, and pulled up a stool beside the engine case. She didn't touch it at first. She just looked at it. Most people see machines as cold pieces of metal, but to Natsia, they were like puzzles, each part telling a story, each wire leading to a reason, each bolt hiding a secret. And this engine? It was speaking to her already. She opened the case carefully and studied the wiring. She didn't rush. She took notes, drew sketches, and compared the design with the books and blueprints she had kept from her university days. The language of machinery came naturally to her. Where others saw confusion, she saw patterns. Where others gave up, she got curious. Hours passed. The town around her grew quiet, and the sounds of traffic faded. But inside that dusty garage, the quiet hum of thought filled the space. Natsia didn't tell anyone what she was doing. She didn't need applause or approval. She just wanted to know. Why did such a brilliant machine fail? What had they missed? And something deep inside her whispered, "You'll find it. You always do." That night, as the stars quietly took their place in the sky, Natsia didn't sleep. The garage was dimly lit with a single tube light hanging above her workbench, flickering a little but still enough to see. She sat there, a notebook open beside her fingers slowly tracing the blueprint of the engine. It wasn't an ordinary engine. It was complicated. Layers of innovation stacked together, the kind of design only found in top research labs or billion-dollar companies. But she wasn't afraid. Natsia's mind worked differently from most people. She didn't panic in front of complexity. She welcomed it, like an old friend. She believed every machine has a language, and if you listened closely it would tell you what was wrong. She didn't always used to be like this. There was a time, years ago, when she was just a young girl in university, sitting in the front row of engineering classes, asking difficult questions, staying late in labs when the rest of her class had gone home. Professors used to say she was gifted. They would smile and say, "One day she will build something that will change everything." But life doesn't always go the way you plan it. When her father passed away suddenly, the weight of the household fell on her shoulders. She had younger siblings, a sick mother, and no one else to earn for the family. The choice was hard but simple. Family came first. She left the university, packed up her dreams, and came back home. That's when she started working at this small garage. At first it was just to make money. But slowly she began to enjoy the work. Fixing tractors, repairing motorcycles, rebuilding broken-down car engines. It became her way of learning. And in that tiny space, surrounded by grease and rusted tools, she continued her own education. Every night, when the customers were gone, she would open her old engineering books and study. She read about new energy models, fuel systems, and combustion techniques. She followed research papers online, watched lectures secretly, and practiced everything she could on the junk engines no one wanted anymore. So when Richard Calloway walked into her garage and challenged her, she didn't feel insulted. She knew exactly who she was. She didn't wear a lab coat, didn't have a fancy degree hanging on her wall, and didn't sit in a glass office. But that didn't mean she was any less capable. She just didn't look like the kind of genius people were used to seeing. Now, sitting alone with that hydrogen engine, she began her analysis. First, she examined the outer layer of the casing, checking for signs of overheating or damage. Then, she carefully opened the internal panels. Her fingers moved like they knew what they were doing. No hesitation, no fear. She started mapping each wire, drawing handmade circuits in her notebook. She noted the placement of every sensor, every control unit, every module that was supposed to help the engine manage fuel input. Everything looked advanced, too advanced for even some of the best university labs. And yet, it all made sense. To her. She realized something. The problem wasn't in the mechanical parts. The build was solid. The materials were expensive. The craftsmanship excellent. So she turned her focus to the electronic control systems. This is where the company had tried to merge AI-based regulation with real-time fuel combustion. It was a brilliant idea. But it was also fragile. For hours, she studied the feedback loop system. Then she saw it, barely visible, just a line of code that didn't belong, like a whisper out of place in a loud conversation. It was a calibration error, buried deep in the software, which caused the fuel injectors to misalign during high-load phases. That meant the engine worked in short tests, but always failed during full performance trials. That's why the engineers couldn't find it. They were probably looking at the hardware, not the behavior of the AI during live operation. She leaned back, almost stunned. They had all missed it. She smiled, not out of pride, but excitement. She picked up her pen again and started drawing a modified system, one that didn't just fix the error, but optimized the flow of fuel, balanced the temperature spikes, and made the system more energy efficient than the original plan. By sunrise, she had reassembled the engine with minor changes. She didn't even need new parts. She just adjusted the timing sensors, reprogrammed the chip slightly, and cleaned the fuel chamber. Then she connected the system to a small generator and pressed the ignition. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the engine came to life. But this time, it didn't struggle. It hummed, deep, steady, and powerful. It was working. Not only was it working, it was smoother, quieter, and more stable than anything described in the company's documents. She sat there looking at it, listening to the hum of her success, not because she wanted anyone to clap for her, but because this engine represented all the nights she had studied under a single bulb, all the times she was told she was wasting her time, all the sacrifices she had made. She recorded the test on her old phone and made notes of every detail, every reading. Then she shut the engine down, cleaned everything again, and covered it with a cloth. It was ready. Later that morning, she called the office. Richard wasn't available at first. His assistant picked up and said, "He's in a meeting." Natsia replied calmly, "Just tell him the engine is fixed." There was a pause on the other end. "Excuse me?" I said. "The hydrogen engine is working. Tell Mr. Calloway to come pick it up." By afternoon, Richard was standing in her garage, again. But this time, he wasn't joking. He looked at the engine, untouched by any external repair company, sitting there like it was waiting for him. "Start it," he said. Natsia didn't say a word. She connected the wires and pressed the ignition button. The engine came to life again, smooth and steady. The RPM stayed stable. No noise, no vibration. His engineers ran tests. The diagnostics confirmed what Natsia already knew. It wasn't just fixed. It was improved. "How?" one of them asked her, unable to hide the shock. Natsia showed them the page from her notebook, the small line of faulty code, the adjusted timing cycle, the redesigned cooling loop, all drawn by hand. Richard didn't speak for a long time. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. She wasn't just a mechanic. She was something else entirely, something rare. She wasn't smiling or acting proud. She just stood there like someone who had done what needed to be done. He finally spoke. "Who taught you all this?" She shrugged. "Books, practice, curiosity?" He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You just fixed a multi-million-dollar failure in one night. My team's been working for weeks. You know that, right?" She nodded. "I know. You're either a genius or magic." Natsia smiled. "Just a mechanic with good ears. Machines talk if you listen." That moment changed everything. He didn't know it yet, but that garage, the dusty, quiet place where nobody looked twice, was about to become the starting point of a journey that would shock the entire engineering world. And as for Natsia, she had just proven something to herself she had always known, but never said out loud. She belonged here, not in the background, not as someone helpful or lucky, but as the one who could do the impossible. The engine was still humming when Natsia stepped back and wiped her hands on a clean cloth. The air inside the garage felt different now. There was no sound from outside, but inside, something powerful had happened. That engine wasn't just metal and wires anymore. It was proof. Proof that she wasn't ordinary. Proof that all those years of quiet struggle, of learning alone, of fixing what others thought was useless, had meant something. When Richard and his engineers finally left with the engine, they were still talking about her. Some of them looked impressed, some shocked, and a few seemed a little embarrassed. After all, how could a woman working alone in a dusty garage solve something that their whole team, with all their high-tech tools and degrees, couldn't? But Natsia wasn't thinking about that. She just wanted to sleep. It had been almost 2 nights without rest. She locked up the garage, covered her notebooks, and went home quietly. No one in the neighborhood even knew what had just happened. To them, she was still just Natsia, the mechanic. Back at the city lab, Richard ordered his team to run every kind of test on the engine again. And to their disbelief, the results were better than before. Not only had Natsia fixed the core problem, but the entire system was now running more efficiently. Fuel consumption was down, output was stable, and even the AI unit was working more smoothly. They couldn't understand how she had done it with so little. Just her brain, a few tools, and no fancy lab. Richard didn't sleep that night either. He kept replaying her calm face in his mind, her quiet confidence. It bothered him in a way he didn't understand. He had always been the man who believed in numbers, in qualifications, in appearances. But this woman had shaken that belief completely. And part of him, though he didn't want to admit it, respected her more than anyone on his team. The next morning, the board of directors came in for their usual weekly review. Richard, for the first time in a long time, walked into the room, with a slight smile. He played the new engine performance video on the big screen. Graphs, charts, and thermal images showed perfect numbers. Then he said the one thing that made everyone in the room raise their eyebrows. "It wasn't us. A local mechanic solved it." Silence. One of the directors laughed nervously. "Excuse me? What do you mean a mechanic?" "She's not a regular mechanic," Richard said. "She's something else. She found the fault in one night. One night. While our entire team struggled for weeks. There was disbelief, confusion, even irritation in the room. You're telling us some random person from the street fixed the most advanced engine we've ever built?" "Yes," Richard said simply. "And we're going to bring her in." This decision didn't go well with everyone. Some people in the company didn't like the idea at all. They thought it was dangerous, unprofessional, even insulting to their own engineers. "What message are we sending?" one manager asked. That experience and education don't matter? But Richard had made up his mind. A day later, Natsia received a phone call from Richard himself. "We want to bring you in," he said. Natsia was silent for a moment. "Why?" "You fixed something we couldn't," he replied. "You clearly see things differently. We need someone like that." "I don't want to be a poster girl," she said, guessing the company might use her for marketing or PR. "I'm not offering you a camera spot," Richard said. "I'm offering you a place on my innovation team. You'll be working with full resources, building and designing, on your own terms." That made her pause. All her life she had worked with broken machines, limited tools, and self-made knowledge. What could she do if she had everything she ever needed? She didn't say yes right away. She thought about it for 2 days. She remembered how she had left university, how her professors used to praise her mind, and how people used to say, "You're just a girl, don't waste time on machines." She remembered working in the garage, fixing engines for hours, barely making enough money to buy books. But she also remembered the sound of that hydrogen engine coming to life in her garage, the way it responded to her touch, the way her design had worked perfectly. She finally called back and said, I'll come, but I want to work, not perform. Deal? Richard replied. The company arranged her travel and stay. She was picked up in a company car, given a guest pass, and led through tall glass buildings filled with the latest tech. People stared. Some smiled politely. Others looked curious. And a few looked threatened. She was introduced to the R&D team, rows of engineers and developers in clean white coats. Some shook her hand. Others just nodded. Richard walked her through the facility himself. "This is where we build the future," he said. She looked around at the machines, the computers, the labs full of blinking lights and testing bays. It was impressive. But what caught her attention wasn't the glamour. It was the broken prototypes sitting in the corner. Things that didn't work yet. That's what excited her. Within a week, she was given a corner of the lab to work in. No pressure, no titles, just tools and access. And that's when the real magic began. She didn't try to impress anyone. She didn't give long presentations. She simply got to work. Day by day, she studied the company's past designs, finding small inefficiencies that others had overlooked. She adjusted components, rewrote simple codes, tested ideas in ways no one else had thought of. People began to notice. An intern who had ignored her the first day now watched her quietly from behind his screen. A senior engineer who once dismissed her as lucky started taking notes from her sketches. And Richard? He started sending more problems her way, things that had been stuck in the pipeline for months. Every time, she found a way forward. One day, she redesigned a cooling system that had failed in over 10 prototypes. Another time, she created a hybrid system using old diesel architecture and clean energy logic, something nobody had thought was possible. But still, she stayed humble. She wore the same clothes, tied her hair the same way, ate lunch quietly on the rooftop instead of the shiny cafeteria. When someone praised her, she just smiled and went back to her work. Then, one afternoon, something happened. She was working late in the lab when Richard walked in, holding a folder. He placed it on her table. "These are the specs for our next-gen hydrogen hybrid model," he said. "I want you to lead it." Natsia looked up, surprised. "Me?" "Yes. You. But your team, they'll follow, because they know now." She opened the folder and saw the specs. They were complex, difficult, beautiful, a real challenge. She nodded slowly. "All right, I'll need full access." "You'll have it." That was the beginning of something huge. Natsia Qureshi, the unknown garage mechanic, was now leading the design of the most advanced engine project in the country. And the world didn't know it yet, but it was about to. Her name wasn't on magazines. She wasn't giving TED Talks, she wasn't on television, but in that lab, surrounded by wires, screens, and humming machines, she was rewriting the rules of what was possible. Not because she wanted fame, but because machines still spoke to her. And now, finally, the world had started listening too. Every morning in the research facility started the same way. Bright white lights came on sharply at 8 a.m. People walked in with coffee mugs, computers blinked to life, and soft humming sounds filled the air as machines warmed up. But something was different now. Something subtle, yet powerful. People weren't just arriving to work. They were watching. Watching one woman. The one no one had expected to become the heart of the lab. Natsia now had a proper workstation in the innovation chamber. Her desk wasn't the biggest. Her tools weren't the newest. But everyone knew whatever she touched worked. Her brain was like a deep well, quiet on the surface, but endlessly rich underneath. She didn't waste words or chase attention. She just built, solved, created. The project she now led wasn't ordinary. The hydrogen hybrid engine had the power to change everything. Cleaner energy, greater power, less cost, but the technology was still new, untested at scale, and extremely sensitive. Any wrong move could result in explosion, data loss, or months of wasted work. But Natsia wasn't afraid. She split the project into 3 phases: structure, efficiency, and stability. Her approach shocked the team. She didn't start with expensive parts or fancy software. She began with hand drawings, diagrams on paper, and whiteboard sessions where she made the team ask one question over and over. Why? Why this material? Why this connection? Why this fuel mix? At first, the engineers around her resisted. Some rolled their eyes. Others whispered about her old-school methods. One even said sarcastically, "We're building a rocket, not a bicycle." But Natsia didn't react. She just said one thing: if your base is weak, your tower will fall, no matter how high. Slowly, her confidence began to win them over. People who doubted her started asking her opinion. Designers who once stayed away began inviting her to brainstorm sessions. Even software engineers started rechecking their codes after she quietly pointed out small miscalculations others missed. She wasn't trying to prove herself anymore. She already had. One afternoon, as she was testing a miniature model of the fuel regulator system, something strange happened. The regulator exploded. Not loudly, but with enough pressure to knock the testing platform to the floor. Everyone rushed in. Natsia was sitting on the floor, her hands black with smoke, but her eyes still focused on the screen in front of her. Instead of panicking, she looked calm. "It didn't fail because of me," she said, pointing to the graph. "The AI response time lagged by 0.08 seconds. That caused a back pressure spike." Richard was among those watching. He didn't say anything, just watched her work. She rebuilt the damaged part in 3 hours and ran the test again. This time it didn't just work. It worked better than before. Richard smiled and whispered to his assistant, "She's the kind of genius that doesn't need the spotlight. She builds it around her without even knowing." News of Natsia's work began to spread within the company. Directors started dropping by to observe her sessions. Investors began asking about that girl from the garage. And one day, an international delegation from a European energy firm visited the lab. They didn't know much about her, just that she had fixed the unsolvable. During their tour, one of the delegates asked a question about engine response under extreme weather. The lead engineer began answering in technical terms, but Natsia stepped forward quietly. "May I?" she asked. Richard nodded. She walked up to the whiteboard and began drawing a simple sketch. Using plain language, she explained how hydrogen reacts to temperature changes, how airflow needs to adjust in real time, and how a smart valve system, one she had redesigned herself, handles it automatically. The delegates were stunned. One of them said, "She speaks like a professor but works like a field engineer." That's rare. After they left, Richard looked at her and said, "You realize you just sold our engine to Europe?" She smiled slightly. "I was just explaining what I know." Back at her desk, she didn't celebrate. She just returned to her design, adjusted a few lines in the fuel map, and kept working. But outside the lab, the story was changing. One of the assistants had recorded her presentation quietly and posted a short clip online with the caption, "Meet the real genius behind the hydrogen engine." It went viral. Within 24 hours, social media was buzzing with her name. News channels picked up the story. Headlines read, "Garage mechanic fixes billion-dollar failure." "Untrained woman outperforms engineering team." "The hidden genius." Who dared to listen to machines? Natsia didn't even know at first. She was too busy solving a torque balance issue in the hybrid system. But soon her phone began buzzing non-stop. Unknown numbers, reporters, news agencies, people from her old neighborhood calling her with excitement. And then her picture was on the cover of 3 tech magazines in 1 week. When she finally saw it, she just shook her head. "They never called when I fixed broken generators in the village," she said softly. The company PR team jumped into action. They arranged interviews, photo shoots, even a feature video. But Natsia wasn't interested. Richard tried to convince her. "People want to hear from you." She replied, "Let the engine talk. That's what they really need." But the pressure kept building. At one point, the board demanded she speak at an international innovation conference. "It's good for the company, and it's good for women in STEM," they argued. She agreed, not because she liked attention, but because she knew somewhere some girl like her might be watching. She wrote her own speech, refused to let anyone edit it, and when she walked on stage in simple clothes, no makeup, and oil-stained hands, the crowd didn't know what to expect. She began softly. "I'm not from a fancy school. I don't have big degrees. But I know how to listen, to people, to problems, and to machines. That's how I fix the engine." The hall was silent. "I didn't grow up with resources. I studied using second-hand books and broken engines. But I learned one thing: understanding is more powerful than appearance." By the time she finished, the entire hall stood up in applause. But when she stepped down, she looked relieved, not proud. Speaking was never her goal. Building was. Back in the lab, she returned to work immediately. The final tests for the hybrid engine had begun. It was ready for field trials. The excitement was huge. But one night, just before the launch, something unexpected happened. A member of the testing team found a bug in the control firmware. A small one, but dangerous enough to cause failure during long runs. Everyone panicked. The launch was just 2 days away. Reporters had been invited. The board was watching closely. If the trial failed publicly, it would be a disaster. Richard called an emergency meeting. People talked over each other. Blame started flying. Stress was high. No one had a solution. Then Natsia quietly stood up. "Give me 2 hours." Richard looked at her. "You sure?" "Yes," she said. She took the firmware file, locked herself in the test chamber, and began working. She reviewed every line of code manually, bit by bit, function by function. And at 2:17 a.m. she found it. A feedback function looped incorrectly when pressure data hit a spike, something that wouldn't show in simulations, but would trigger in real environments. She fixed it, rewrote the loop, optimized the delay cycle, then tested it again, twice. The error was gone. She walked back into the conference room, where a few team members were still awake, and said, "It's ready." The next day, the engine went live on national television. The test vehicle started smoothly. The engine performed beyond expectations. Efficiency was up, 0 emissions, clean burn, quiet run. It was perfect. Reporters clapped. Investors smiled. The board members shook hands with each other. But Natsia? She stood at the back of the crowd, unnoticed. She watched the engine she had rebuilt from scratch take center stage and felt no need to speak. Someone tapped her shoulder. It was Richard. "You changed the game," he said. She smiled. "I just fixed what was broken." He shook his head. "No, you built something that didn't exist before." And in that moment, Natsia knew. This wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. The sound of success didn't always come with drums and fireworks. Sometimes it came quietly, like the soft hum of an engine running perfectly. That was what Natsia heard that day when the test vehicle completed its first full cycle using her hydrogen hybrid system. The engine didn't roar. It whispered, clean, steady, proud. The world clapped and cheered on live television, but she simply stood at the back, her hands folded, watching her creation come alive. After the test drive, the world didn't remain the same for Natsia. Her story was now not just a local wonder, it was global. Newspapers across continents printed headlines like, "A mechanic's mind that changed the future," and "The woman who built tomorrow's engine today." But for Natsia, the biggest reward wasn't fame. It was the engine, working, stable, efficient, and most importantly, built for the people, not for ego. The company's board members immediately started preparing investment plans. Richard proposed that they move into full production. But more than that, he had something else in mind. He walked into the lab the next morning with a simple piece of paper and handed it to Natsia. "What's this?" she asked. "A proposal," he replied. She opened it slowly. Her eyes scanned the lines. "You want me to lead a new division?" "Not just lead," he smiled. "Build it. Your team, your vision, your rules." Natsia stared at the paper. All her life she had worked under others, trying to prove herself silently. And now someone was giving her a blank canvas. She didn't answer right away. She took the paper, folded it neatly, and said, "I'll think about it." That evening, she didn't go back to her apartment. She took a long walk through the city, past the markets, the streets full of people, past broken old bikes, children chasing stray footballs, and small corner shops fixing fans and radios. She stood near one mechanic shop and smiled. A boy, no older than 15, was trying to fix a blender. He struggled but didn't give up. She watched him quietly for a few minutes, then walked away. That night, she called Richard. "I'll build the division," she said. "But it won't just be for scientists in suits." "What do you mean?" "I want students, tinkerers, villagers, women with no degrees but sharp minds. I want people like I used to be. With potential, not just papers." There was a pause on the other end. "Done," he said finally. And so, the new department was created. It was named NAQ Innovation Lab, initials taken from her full name, Natsia Akdas Qureshi. The lab looked nothing like traditional tech departments. There were no strict dress codes, no pressure to speak English, no fancy titles. Just work, ideas, and open minds. The walls were filled with whiteboards and chalk drawings. Old engines sat beside AI modules. Young minds sat beside retired technicians. Everyone shared ideas. Natsia personally visited colleges, villages, small training centers, and even garage workshops. She found people, hidden gems, and brought them in. Some didn't even know how to use a computer, but within months, they were solving problems no one had cracked before. And that's when the real wave began. Projects from her lab started changing lives. One team developed a hybrid water pump for desert farmers that ran on solar cells and wind power. Another team created a low-cost medical machine that worked in power outage conditions, saving lives in remote areas. Natsia didn't need to speak at conferences anymore. Her work spoke louder than any speech could. But not everything was smooth. With success came enemies. Some traditional engineers and powerful people in the industry didn't like this change. They felt threatened. "This isn't how innovation works," they said. "You can't just mix garage people with professionals." One day, an old CEO from a rival company made a public statement. "The girl mechanic is playing with toys. Real engines need real minds." The media ran wild with it. When Natsia was asked to respond in an interview, she calmly said, "If a toy saves a life, solves a problem, or gives someone hope, then maybe we need more toys." The internet loved her for it. The rival CEO quietly faded from the spotlight after that. But Natsia didn't let the drama distract her. She kept building. One morning, she received a letter, handwritten. It was from her old university professor, the one who once said she had a machine inside her head. The letter read, "Dear Natsia, they once told you to sit quietly and let others lead. You chose to listen to your curiosity instead. Today, the world listens to you. I am proud. We are all proud." Tears came to her eyes for the first time in months, not because of the praise, but because someone had finally remembered who she used to be. The next few months brought more milestones. Her hydrogen hybrid engine received international environmental awards. Her work was included in global innovation reports. Countries across Asia and Africa started asking for help setting up labs like hers. And she didn't hesitate. She began building small innovation corners in villages and poor communities. Each one had basic tools, a mentor, internet access, and her recorded lessons. She called them future nooks, children from poor backgrounds, many who had never even seen a real lab, started learning engineering, design, coding, and problem-solving. She would often visit these centers in disguise, just to see the magic with her own eyes. Once, a girl no older than 10 showed her a drawing of a bicycle that runs on compressed air. "Where did you get this idea?" Natsia asked. The girl shrugged. "From your video. You said machines talk. I listened." Natsia smiled. That's how it begins. Meanwhile, inside her main lab, a new challenge was brewing. The world was moving towards energy storage, batteries, that could last longer, work in extreme temperatures, and cost less. Most companies were stuck. Progress was slow, but Natsia saw it differently. She started experimenting with natural elements, things others ignored. Clay, salt water, plant fibers. Her idea was to create organic batteries for poor communities, cheap, safe, and renewable. Her team thought she was crazy at first, but within 3 months, they had a prototype that powered a small home fan for 8 hours, using nothing but banana peel cells and a homemade electrolyte paste. That battery became a global headline again. Even tech giants from Silicon Valley reached out for collaborations, but Natsia kept her focus sharp. She rejected offers worth millions. Instead, she licensed the battery for free use in poor countries. "Innovation without compassion is just a product," she said in a talk. "But innovation with purpose, that's power." By now, universities named buildings after her, TV stations ran documentaries on her life. Even film producers came knocking, asking for rights to make movies about her. She agreed to one condition. "Don't show me as a hero. Show me as a listener." That's all I ever did. And in the quiet of one late night, as she sat in her lab surrounded by young minds and half-built machines, someone asked her, "Do you ever miss the garage?" She looked around. The wires, the smell of warm metal, the low buzz of ideas in the air. She smiled. "No, I never left it. Because for Natsia, the garage wasn't a place. It was a way of thinking, of listening, of believing that even the simplest person could fix the impossible, if they were brave enough to try."